Patch 6.4 has just been released. We've got some beautiful art by Exist. Since it is patch 6.4, this is themed around Mario Kart 64. We've got a lot of vehicular Pokemon, a lot of speedsters, as well as the addition of something called Victory Road. Very fun and clever artwork to represent the patch. And since the artwork for the previous patch wasn't released before I made my patch rundown for 6.3, I have to show it off here because it is absolutely incredible. Highly recommend that you pause and look at all the intricate details behind these pieces of art. But without further ado, this is a patch rundown. Let's look at the new Pokemon that have been added to the game. There is a new Steel Artificial Poison Regional, Varoom, and its evolution, Revavroom. Really not at all familiar with this Pokemon, but I love Revavroom as a name. I think this Pokemon is pretty stupid, but honestly, I kind of like it. And what I really like is its synergies. In earlier patches, if you were in a region with Steel or Artificial, in the early game you didn't really get anything. But now you get Varoom, who is a pretty good synergy filler that you'll probably hold on to the entire game if you plan on running Steel or Artificial. And it's got a really cool effect that's really fun to play around with. For every tile that Varoom travels, it will gain 20 speed, and its ability does single target damage based on its speed stat. It loses all of its speed buffs and then sends itself to the back line so that it can drive up to its opponents and rebuild those lost speed buffs. It is a lot of fun to try to position this guy optimally to build up its speed, and as someone who loves both Steel and Artificial or running both at the same time, this is an extremely welcome addition to the game. And it also has Poison Synergy, which I guess you could run it in a Poison team. There's a little bit of overlap with Artificial, but overall it's Steel and Artificial that are going to be its primary uses. Next up, we've got Ladybug and Ledian. It is a 2-cost ad pick, yet another Bug Flying Synergy Pokemon, but this one also has Fighting Synergy, which is really cool. Fighting and Flying has decent overlap, but Ladybug also greatly enables Pokemon like Heracross and Pheromosa in fighting comps. And as for Ladybug's stats and ability, nothing too impressive here. It just has Mach Punch, which we've already seen before on Kubfu. So let's move on to Tailo and Swellow. Tailo is a wild flying 3-cost Pokemon, and it is not an ad pick. It has the ability Brave Bird, which we've seen before as well. But the real standout thing about Tailo is its 80 speed stat, and with Tailo in the game, there are now 4 wild flying units. I'm really interested in seeing someone run all 4 flying wild Pokemon alongside like a Dragon 3 with Dredagon. You could get something like Wild 6 Flying 8, which would be really fun, but overall, nothing too impressive here. So let's now talk about a new 5-cost Pokemon. We've got Venipede, Whirlipede, and Scolipede. This is a Bug Poison Field Pokemon. Pretty interesting combo. We've never really seen Field and Bug together. It's a frontline unit with good stats, but definitely not as good as most other 5-cost frontline units, because the idea is that you'd want to clone it with Bug Synergy, and I definitely think its best use is in those Bug Poison teams. Now, we'll be talking about this later, but Venipede is taking Sewaddle's place as the 5-cost Bug Pokemon, and Venipede's ability is actually a dashing ability. It deals damage based on its speed stat, it deals damage to everything along the way, and it has the chance to apply Flinch. And Venipede already has a very naturally high speed stat, and paired with additional speed items, its ability can definitely deal a lot of damage. But overall, I'm not too sure how I feel about Venipede. It's always really good to splash in a Bug 2 or Bug 4 synergy, and Venipede is now the best bug to do that with, but we'll definitely have to see how impactful it can be. But overall, it's hard to justify using this guy in Field since you won't be able to run Field 9 if you do want to get Bug 2 synergy active, and I haven't had too much success with Bug Poison comps, so I'm really interested to see if Venipede can make an impactful difference for Bug Poison teams. Definitely looking forward to seeing this guy in action. I think it's a solid unit, and I really hope it enables late game Bug teams. Let's now talk about a new unique Pokemon in Emolga. It is a 2-range electric flying unique. It's got pretty nice damage dealing stats, and a very fun bouncing projectile ability where the number of bounces scales with its speed stat. Overall, sounds very fun, it's not too complicated, and it will work well in both electric and flying comps. And there is also a new legendary in Celesteela. It is a frontline unit with some pretty great frontline stats. It's a little slow, but it does have a very nice attack stat of 30, and its ability does tons of damage to adjacent enemies. It burns them, and then Celesteela will dash away. And yeah, overall just a very solid unit in any of its 3 synergies. Sometimes Grass can struggle with dealing damage to teams with high defenses, so it's always nice to see some more Grass and Steel overlap. And as for flying overlap, in a flying team, both Grass and Steel can work pretty well with it. And that's pretty much it. There technically is one more Pokemon, but I think it makes more sense to talk about that a little bit later in the rundown. So let's now move on to changes in the existing Pokemon, starting with all the unique Regi Pokemon, which are now all legendary Pokemon. And all the Regis are also now fossil Pokemon. Regirock's ability is now buffed up a little bit with more range and damage. Regice now has the ability Hail, which is the same as Aurorus. Registeel's ability is now Iron Head, and it's pretty much the same, but it also deals damage. Regidrago is now only one range, but because it now has much higher health, it can deal a lot more damage with its ability. It's also important to note that its second synergy is Fossil and its third is Monster, so it's pretty cool to note that it can get Fossil 2 on its own, and it works really well with the other Fossil Dragon units. Regieleki, not too many changes, and Regigigas lost its Monster synergy, but it got some nice health buffs. Circuitry is now an electric artificial light unit, which I would definitely say is a buff over its previous human synergy. There's certainly a lot more overlap with light and electric, and artificial synergy has the potential for a light ball. Melmetal now gives you the item Mystery Box, which turns all future Dittos into the Pokemon Meltan. Meltan is a new Pokemon that when you put it over your Melmetal, it will permanently increase its max HP by 50. You can also use Meltan as a Pokemon. It has very poor stats, but it does have a very cool effect with its ability, where it will send a steel Pokemon from the shop pool across the screen, sort of like how Unknowns can fly across the screen, and when you click on them, they get added to your bench. Now in theory, this is crazy good. I'm not sure if you can put items on Meltan, but if you can, giving it a ton of PP items, it would generate a ton of extra economy through steel Pokemon, or you can get a bunch of evolutions, but in reality, I just don't think you'll be able to afford to do that, because first off, you need to find the Meltan, and then you have to itemize it. You can only find it after your legendary round, where you don't have the HP to spare. I'm not sure if I would actually take Meltans over Dittos, but still, it's always nice to be able to buff up your legendary unit. And the potential for generating extra steel units is really cool. It's definitely more doable on PvE rounds, but overall, I think Meltan is just going to be an HP buff for your Melmetal. Pyukumuku's Death Explosion now does damage based on its HP stat. It actually deals less damage than it did previously, but with enough Amorphous bumps, or perhaps a cheeky Dynamax band, it can definitely deal a lot more damage. Unknown S has been changed. It now summons a Tidal Wave, kind of like Aquatic Synergy. Unknown Z freezes everything for 2 seconds, and Unknown Y now casts Meditate on all allies, which increases everything's attack by 100%. Surfing Pikachu got some substantial nerfs. Its base stats are greatly reduced, but it now gains additional shields and attack damage based on your Aquatic Synergy level. So at Aquatic 8 Synergy, it'll feel pretty similar to how it did before. It just won't get as much healing from Aquatic Waves because it has shields instead of HP now. But if you're able to acquire yourself a Pikachu and a Surfboard and obtain Surfing Pikachu that way, its stats are only going to be really good if you invest in Aquatic Synergy. This is definitely a very necessary change, as previously people were able to get Surfing Pikachu in very early rounds, whether it was through an early Electivire carousel, or they got very lucky with Artificial 2, and getting a 250 health unit at stage 4, that was not okay. And thankfully, it's not going to happen anymore. Sawaddle's line is now 2 cost. Sad to say goodbye to this late game beast, but at least now we can see it do some cool things in the early game. Skorupi has gained Dark Synergy just like its evolved form. The Darmanitan Zen form, that's what Darmanitan transforms into when it has low health. It now has a range stat of 5 and deals damage which scales with its ability power, and the attacks also heal for 100% of the damage dealt. This is really nice for it. Darmanitan had always been a pretty nice statted 4 cost unit, but more often than not, its transformation was a detriment. You'd definitely rather have it just deal damage and die rather than not deal damage and escape and then die later. Now it's going to continue to deal damage after it transforms. You get to make use of its Psychic Synergy more, and it has decent potential to transform back and deal even more damage. The ability Mach Punch now has different damage at all tiers. This is to accommodate for Ladybug and Ledian, but it also means a very slight nerf to Kubfu and Tyrogue. To make up for that though, Kubfu, and only Kubfu, not its evolved Urshifus, have a lower PP. Chinchu's line has a new ability in Electro Ball that's the same as Emolga's. Deerling also has a new ability, single target damage that also heals itself. It's not going to be noticeable on Deerling, who has a very poor attack stat, but once it evolves into Sawsbuck, that actually does some more damage. But overall, I'm still not really seeing a very good use for this unit. However, I do think it is slightly better because of this change. Hitmonlee got a slight attack nerf. It's actually more significant than it may seem, since Hitmonlee's ability is enhanced when it has higher attack than its target. Ghastly got a slight PP nerf, as well as Volcanion. Both of these I feel like are warranted, and especially Volcanion, who has been performing very well. Applin's line's second synergy is now Gourmet instead of Grass. That's actually very nice. It makes it a lot easier to hit Gourmet 3, and overall makes the transition from Dragon to Gourmet and then back again very easy. It makes getting Hydrapple, or whatever evolution you're going for, a lot easier. Also, the speed lowering effect of Diplin's ability now scales with ability power. Probably the least significant change of this patch, because ideally you don't even run a Diplin ever. You want to evolve it to Hydrapple as soon as you can. Chingling's line got a slight PP buff, and the same thing with Screamtail. Both Indeedees got a small buff to their HP stats, and a very small defense increase for the female. Pheasantipity now has higher defense, but is only 1 range. Overall, I think that's a buff. It's a lot easier to maximize the spread of its ability when it is 1 range. Pecharunt got a pretty significant PP nerf, definitely warranted as Possession was just way too powerful. Stakataka got a small damage buff. Instead of tickling you with 6 attack, it will now gently poke you with 10 attack. Tapu Bulu, its ability got a slight buff. Galarian Moltres now only has 2 range. Totally makes sense because its non-Galarian counterpart also only has 2 range. And overall, Galarian Moltres had just been a very strong threat, and some kind of nerf is definitely warranted. Skarmory's spikes no longer deal damage to steel Pokemon, since more often than not, in steel teams, Skarmory would just deal more damage to your own team than to your opponent's team with its spikes, so this is going to help steel a lot for sure. Veluza, once again getting another buff. The duration of its invincibility when it casts has been doubled. One of the first games that I played this patch was with Veluza, and I think with the right items it can definitely do some cool things, but overall, I'm still not very impressed. On paper, everything about this Pokemon is super cool and exciting, but in reality, it just doesn't have enough burst and it always dies. I always want to try Veluza and finding a way to make it work, and this buff is definitely nice, but overall, I think we're still going to be looking for a way to pilot this thing. Veluza is always going to be a very nice synergy filler, but hopefully, one day it will be more than just that. The female Nidoran is now the regional variant, whereas the male is the regular variant. Not too significant, but I think this is pretty nice because now the armor break that male Nidoran can apply, it should in theory be easier to find that ability if you need it. Patrat's line is now normal light, and I think losing Wild is actually a huge hit for Wild synergy. It was one of Wild's only ranged units, and also the only way to get Light 2 with Lycanroc in a Wild 9 team. I guess now it's going to provide its support to normal teams. I guess that's nice with a Clefairy. And Cyclizar, when it casts its ability and summons that little substitute, Pokemon will now target that substitute when it spawns, instead of the Cyclizar or anything else really. It's a little decoy, so of course it has to do its job. The ability Magic Bounce now has a slight delay before the ability is actually bounced back, and there's also an actual visual effect to the ability being reflected. Not a really significant change other than a nice quality of life, and a positive change in terms of visuals and clarity. Always nice to have these. And finally, Cottony and Whimsicott. I forgot to talk about these guys last patch notes, but honestly they were pretty insignificant. Aside from a nice speed stat, nothing too significant, and the community and meta seems to have agreed because this patch, Cottony and Whimsicott are getting some small defense and HP buffs. And that's all the changes to Pokemon, so now let's move on to synergies. Ghost synergies got some nerfs. Ghost's dodge chance and silence chance has been decreased. Those chances were always infuriating, especially in very close battles. Now there will hopefully be less fights where things just feel hopeless against Ghost units. And another small nerf, Ghost 8's curse duration is now 8 seconds instead of 7. And it should also be worth mentioning that Aquatic Synergy now increases the time that the Ghost Curse takes to kill its target. So for example, with Aquatic 6 Synergy activated, the curse will take 15 seconds rather than the original 8 seconds to knock out its target. A very nice change, offers more counterplay to something that usually is only stopped by a Fluffy Tail. I think Ghost is still going to be fine, but definitely a lot weaker than before. And aside from Ghost, there's some other small changes to synergies. Fossil Synergy's Revival. Previously, any excess damage dealt to the reviving Pokemon, any excess damage would carry over and deal damage to a reviving fossil Pokemon's shields. And that had the potential for fossil Pokemon to just not revive at all. That is no longer going to happen anymore. because that excess damage is now limited to just 50% of the shield. Overall, just a slight buff to fossil Pokemon. And the last thing, a bug with Flying 8 synergy. Previously, the Flying 8 dive bombs scaled with ability power, and that's no longer going to be the case. Pretty crazy that that went unnoticed for so long. I mean, you rarely built ability power on flying units, but overall this is going to be a nerf to Flying 8. And that's all for synergies. Alright, now let's talk about items. There are a lot of changes to items. One of the craziest changes is the loss of Amulet Coin as a craftable item. Amulet Coin is now an item that can be picked up in a round 4 carousel event, kind of similar to the Gimmighoul Coin and Duskull. So you're no longer able to get it every game. There's some positive and negative things about this change. The positive is that you no longer have to worry about Amulet Coin in the late game. There won't be any situations where you're forced to make one anymore. But this change also limits the hyper roll strategies that relied on early evolutions and the Amulet Coin for economy. Those types of games are now going to be stuck behind having this Meowth carousel show up. And on top of that, Amulet Coin now lowers your max interest rate by 1, which is going to further de-incentivize people to play Amulet Coin. I'm definitely going to miss those games where you get an Amulet Coin very early alongside a strong evolution, or those times where you get 3 extra gold fighting off Spearows. But yeah, this item once was my bread and butter, and after a bunch of nerfs and changes, I feel like Amulet Coin is going to be something that we almost never see now. Taking its place with the recipe of Charcoal and Nevermelt Ice is the Shell Bell, which now gives special defense instead of ability power. And taking Shell Bell's old recipe place is the Pokénomicon, which also has a new look. Oh, also, did you know that this is actually called Pokemon Nomicon? I refuse to call it that, it's Pokénomicon to me. But overall, this recipe just kind of makes more sense, Charcoal being a burnt piece of wood, Twisted Spoon being the ability power item, and Pokénomicon being a magical tome that sets things on fire. It just makes sense. But let's continue down the line. What's taking Pokénomicon's place? Why, it's the Ability Shield, which is the old Cleanse Tag, but now gives ability power instead of crit chance. And taking Cleanse Tag's place is Smoke Ball, which only gives crit chance, but once activated, it will grant the user some extra shields, which is very nice. Taking Smoke Ball's place is the Shiny Charm, which now only gives physical defense, but when activated will grant the user 50 PP, which is pretty crazy. It was already one of the strongest items in the current meta, and it just got stronger. And taking the Shiny Charm's place is the Max Revive, which now gives special defense instead of regular defense. And the final changed recipe, which is taking Max Revive's place, is the Sticky Barb. Sticky Barb is a new item that reflects damage back to melee attacks. The reflected damage is true damage equal to 3 plus 15% of its holder's defense, and it also has a chance to inflict wound. This is a fantastic item for your tanky healing frontline with high defense. Just gives it a lot more damage potential and is especially good against teams with high speed. If something like a Muscle Band upgrade Infernape is shredding through your team, a Sticky Barb on your tankiest Pokemon is very likely to shut it down, because not only does it do true damage, but it also prevents healing with that wound. Now with all of those new recipes out of the way, there's still some changes that we have to talk about, starting with a reworked Aqua Egg. It now only gives 30 initial extra PP, but after casting an ability, instead of just giving a flat extra 20 PP, its holder will instead regain 20% of its max PP, and gain an additional extra 2 for every time it casts its ability. So what this means is that it's a lot better for units that have a very high amount of PP, but also great for units that have low PP, because the Aqua Egg is going to scale up and give more PP to Pokemon who are able to cast very often. I can't wait to use this in a sound team with huge AoE abilities. It sounds like a lot of fun. The healing effect of Green Orb now heals 3 plus 3% of max HP, which on any Pokemon that has less than 300 HP is going to mean more healing, and 30% of excess healing is going to be converted into PP instead. So just picking a random unit, let's say you have Green Orb on a Magmar, it's going to generate around 3.5 PP per second. And considering you can splash this effect onto up to 8 other Pokemon, that's kind of like having a Thwackey that attacks every second. Of course, the units have to stay adjacent to each other, as well as be at full health to get that PP generation. I mean, it's not bad if you get the healing effect instead of the PP generation. But overall, this seems like a very strong item. It makes early game ground even more scary than it already is. You can run Green Orb on your backline units or in teams that previously didn't really run it. For example, normal, which had a lot of shields instead of health. Green orb just might be the strongest item of the new patch, and people might not notice it because its impact isn't as visible as, say, a muscle band or a soul dew. Speaking of soul dew, it now gives 5 AP and 5 PP per second, which definitely makes it a lot more versatile. It was an item that you used previously in tankier comps that would be able to have a prolonged fight, but now it's going to be better in bursty comps, things like sound or psychic teams, because that guaranteed PP generation is going to be very nice. Yeah, that's a pretty nice change. And Mana Scarf is now the Deep Sea Tooth. It's gotten a huge buff to its attack stat, going from 3 to 7. Its PP generation has gone down from 8 to 5, but if an attack is able to knock out a target, it's going to generate an extra 15 PP. I think this is going to be especially nice on units that buff their own attacks or speed, and Deep Sea Tooth really leans into that more offensive attacking style, much more than the Mana Scarf did. Also, Mana Scarf is just kind of a weird name. As far as I know, there's no such thing as mana in Pokemon. Instead, we call it PP, which is much more fun, and makes it a lot harder for me to take myself seriously. And we're not done yet. The artificial item, Swiftwing, is now Air Balloon, which now additionally grants its holder immunity to board effects like spikes, poison clouds, cotton, hail. Not too impactful, but definitely a nice added bonus. Fire Shard now gives +3 speed in addition to the attack. Definitely a lot nicer, and definitely presents a lot more incentive to use Fire Shards. Grass Berries now heal 50 HP, and the Pecha and Citrus Berries heal 100 HP. That's a pretty significant boost to Grass, and is really going to reward those really good Grass plays where you time your berries just right. Gold Bottle Cap now gives a +30 base crit chance, which is definitely needed. Gold Bottle Cap was sort of the shiny item that you didn't want to see, especially when you consider that Magikarps can no longer give shiny items. It still definitely had a lot of potential, and with the right team comps it actually was a very strong item, but it really is an item that needs to be built around. But in most situations where you're playing Baby 7, or you're offered it after taking down Lugia and Ho-Oh, it was usually way too late to work towards that shiny bottle cap. At least now, it's going to have a little bit more useful impact immediately. Berserk Gene now only confuses for 3 seconds, which makes it a lot more usable. You definitely still want to get that fluffy tail, but now you definitely don't have to be as scared of having your Berserk Gene Pokemon just wipe out itself and your entire team. Bunch of human synergy TMs and HMs have been removed and replaced. Out goes Bide, Retaliate, and Whirlpool, and in comes Reflect, Counter, and Dive. I think Dive is a fantastic ability, and a lot of Pokemon will really like that. And Counter and Reflect are definitely strong, but also a lot more niche. Just like a lot of the human TMs, you'll only want to use it in certain situations. And finally, Veluza's signature dish, Smoked Fillet, now only reduces 5 HP instead of 10. And that's all the items. The big thing is the recipes. I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of them. It really is quite the shakeup, and I'm excited to see what people come up with as the new best items for various Pokemon. But now we can finally talk about any remaining miscellaneous changes or any gameplay related changes. Really, the only gameplay change that we haven't talked about is that Duskull can now appear in round 4 of the game. That's the carousel that offers Gimmighoul coins, and they also give an extra 3 gold when obtained. Free money? You know what, Duskull, you make a pretty convincing argument. I'm really interested in trying out Gimmighoul coin Open Fort. But another big change is that Elo is no longer obtained in Quick Play. In fact, Quick Play has just been removed. It's now called Classic. Classic is just an 8-player game of auto chess with no elo and no consequences, and I think that's awesome. I'll definitely be playing a lot more Quick Play or Classic if I just want to relax or try something new. Maybe I want to channel my inner iPad kid and watch a video or listen to a podcast while playing. It's a great way to play the game without needing to put my full brain power into it. I mean, technically it was already possible to do this with a custom room or a Smeargle Scribble, but overall I think it's just going to be a lot easier and more convenient to get a classic lobby to fill up. And there's other advantages to this as well. Now for the leaderboard, it is no longer possible to just climb the ranks using only Quick Play. There's a lot of players who had previously abused this system, just hitting the bare minimum amount of ranked games and then farming new players or less experienced players, just using the same proven and consistent synergies in these easier lobbies, and their elo didn't really match their actual skill level, at least when compared to other players within their elo range. And I think this is just going to be a better experience for everyone, whether you're a competitive player and you don't want to compete with players who are abusing the system, or you're a casual player who doesn't want to get stomped by someone who's just taking advantage of easier lobbies. This also incentivizes people to play ranked lobbies and play more ranked games, and so far this has worked really well. Ranked lobbies are definitely filling up quicker than before, and it's a lot less difficult to find lobbies than in the previous patch. Though that might also have something to do with a new patch being fresh and everyone wanting to try it out. So we'll definitely have to see if this is actually a good change for the rank system in the long run. Personally, I am all for it. This is an idea that was proposed and shut down multiple times in the past, but the perception of it has definitely changed. And you can read the idea thread that I actually wrote up which got this change to be implemented for more thorough reasonings and discussions surrounding this change. And alongside this change, elo decay is a lot less harsh. And there is also a new leaderboard called Victory Road, where every month you can gain points for doing well in games and lose points for doing poorly. And it's a race to the top to see who can get 500 points first. And there's even a title to be earned here. This is a new monthly leaderboard for players who not only play a lot of games, but also are able to place consistently well. If this sounds like you, definitely consider racing to the top of Victory Road. With all of that, the only other changes are UI and bug fix related. I'll just throw them up on the screen if you want to have a read through. With that being said, I do want to highlight and commend the hard work that has gone through on improving animations and basic effects. It's pretty hard to keep track of all the effects and attacks that are going on in every battle, but definitely keep an eye out on some of the animations. They look really nice. It's very clear that a lot of hard work has gone into it. Here's an idea. In the next game you play, in every battle, focus on one Pokemon and try to see how cool their attacks are, how cool their abilities are. Try to notice their projectiles and what their abilities look like. And I definitely think you'll have an appreciation for a lot of the hard work behind these animations. And with all of that, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next game. Take care.